Hello all and welcome to ScreenWorks. I'm John Uriarte, curator of ScreenWorks with Photographers Gallery in London, together with Marco De Mutis, digital curator at Fotomuseum Winterthur in Switzerland. We started this program of live stream events in 2020. With ScreenWorks, we aim to explore the changing role of photography in the digital and network culture in a series of events that are led by artists, curators, researchers, sharing their screen with our audience to take us to the corners of their own computers or the corners of the internet where their practice takes place. We actively encourage our guests to experiment with a live stream format, resulting in a very different events that can range from a tutorial, a guided tour, live performance, or a peek behind the scenes of a particular artistic practice. We have hosted more than 80 events so far. You can find the recordings of all of them on the public accessible archive that we have on our own website and also on our YouTube channel. The recordings are categorized by thematic tags on our website on skillworks.com, and also categorized by topics, by playlists on our YouTube channel. Please remember that if you have found ScreenWorks useful for your professional or personal interests, you can subscribe to folders. For €7, you will support the program and its artists, and also get your personalized folder on folders.screenworks.com. There you will receive files and extra content from the artists and researchers of ScreenWorks. And now some housekeeping information. Your microphone should be muted to avoid noise disturbances. If it is still on, please mute it now. And just so you know, we are recording and we will be archiving this event. So you can also use the public chat to ask questions, or feel free to send a private message to Marco or to me, and we will bring it to the discussion with today's artist at the end of the event.
And hello, everyone, from me too. I'm Marco De Mutis, digital curator at Fotomuseum Winterthur in Switzerland. Today, we round up the year 2024 with a bittersweet celebration of sorts. In fact, in about a month, from January 14, 2025, to be precise, Instagram augmented reality effects built by users will no longer be available. Meta announced last August that they are pulling the plug on their Spark platform, which launched in 2019, deleting thousands of face filters. So I guess it's going to be a bit of a funeral as well, or an anticipated funeral. And as curators of the digital transformations of the photographic image, we have followed the development of face filters through Snapchat, Instagram, or recently TikTok filters, included a ScreenWorks with curator Zaiba Jabbar, where we looked at some of the artists working creatively and critically with this medium. Not only do face filters connect with the tradition of photographic portraits, but also digital selfie and representations that shape identities, but they also have emerged to be shared networked masks that can be created and exchanged online among different people. Their popularity connects makeup brands and digital artists, fashion photographers and digital folklore, critical technologists, but also the entertainment industry. These are just some of the stakeholders involved in the creation and circulation of AR face filters, and their impact on visual culture range from the reinforcement of beauty standards to form of artistic experimentation and creative resistance to biases and norms. So we are taking the chance to say goodbye to all the Instagram AR effect, to look back at this phenomenon and its development on the Instagram platform over the last 6 years, and to take us through this exploration, which will double also as an act of digital conservation through our video recording. We have invited researcher Lauren A. Miller, who has written extensively about Instagram face filters. Miller will explore Meta's and Instagram's popular face filters, using herself as both researcher and participant, documenting her experience applying these filters, turning this fleeting form of augmented reality into a more permanent record. The conversation will focus on 12 filters, on 12 different types of AR filters, critiqued through a feminist lens that questions digital beauty standards. The screen walk will also address the legitimacy of using filters to subvert beauty ideals and examine how claims of empowered technology use are challenged by Meta's decision to remove these filters. Miller will celebrate the creativity of AR filters and selfie culture while critically reflecting on their flaws and the lasting impact of Meta's removal of the technology from their platforms. Lauren A. Miller is currently a confirmed PhD student at Swinburne University of Technology in Melbourne. Prior to returning to study, Miller spent almost a decade working in marketing and social media management. Her PhD project examines Instagram's augmented reality filters through a socio-technical lens, with a focus on how the technology impacts beauty and surgery culture. Miller's research interests include feminist approaches to social media, digital privacy and surveillance, digital beauty cultures, theories of the technology user as cyborg, and digital embodiment praxis. Dear Lauren, thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and especially considering the time zone with Melbourne. The screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Yes, I just want to say thank you for the invitation. As you mentioned, Marco, I think it's a really prescient idea to perform this walkthrough because obviously filters are going away, but the ephemerality of the medium is also a significant hurdle that I have faced as a researcher. So in my research, I have created a typology of filters, as was mentioned before. We'll be looking at 11 of them today. I'm just excluding the world filter type, which focuses on filters that deal with the environment. The ones that I'll be focusing on are just face filters. So today I am going to walk you through sort of a linear narrative of how filter use cultures and the design of filters has evolved since they joined the platform in 2017. And I'll be using those 2 points to kind of, I will be moderating those 2 points, through the lens of platform governance. So the way that Meta makes these sort of striking, resounding decisions, seemingly out of nowhere, because it is not the first time and it will not be the last. It's something that we refer to as black boxing, and essentially everything within the black box is obscured. And as far as Meta goes, that's pretty much everything they do. It's all inside the black box. So in terms of filters, you put something in, which is your face, and then you get something out, which is a filtered image. Everything that occurs within that box is pretty much obscure. So my typology and my research is kind of a way to try and shed a little bit of demystification to the whole process and just how Meta works, generally speaking. So that said, let's begin. So we are starting here right at the beginning with Instagram. I'll call a spade a spade. They stole the filter feature as well as the stories affordance from Snapchat. So Instagram added stories in 2016, and stories is the area where ephemeral content lives. On Instagram, prior to that, it was all posted to your grid and it was permanent. And following this, they also duplicated the face filter feature in 2017. This is one of the early filters. They were all internally designed by Instagram and they were very simple. You can see it's slightly interactive. If I touch the screen.
Sorry, Lauren. We can't actually see anything. Maybe can you try again?
Oh, sorry. Apologies.
Yes.
All you've missed is this filter replaying on me for 30 seconds anyway. So they're very simple, the early filters. A lot of the design was based off the notorious dog Snapchat filters. So not a whole lot of beautification. Obviously, we can see the rosy cheeks and the smooth skin, but overall, it was marked by a real extreme cartoonishness. So yeah, I'm sure everyone remembers the Snapchat dog filter. It was endemic in 2015, 2016. So this is where we started. Very humble beginnings. I think there were around 10 filters. However, things shift dramatically when we move into 2018. So this is the beginning of the closed beta program of Spark AR, which, as was mentioned before, is the AR filter creation medium that Meta has released. So we're starting here with a filter by Ines Alpha. And this would fall under the cyborgian type of filters that I have designated. And I just realized I'll quickly run through the types as well. So there are surgery, beauty, makeup, alt beauty, cyborgian, digital adornment, character, silly, creative, pastiche, and aesthetic. And we will cover through all of them today. So anyway, as I was saying, this period saw a lot of really innovative growth. This filter in particular, I think, is indicative of that early growth. You can change the colors on the filter, which was fairly novel for early filters. It also has sound, which I've turned off, but this, along with a filter that I will leave this area in a minute to discuss, by Joanna Jaskowska. But generally speaking, this is another one of her filters. The period was very much marked by something I would sort of almost refer to as similar to retrofuturism, just in the sense that it was really marked by optimism and like a sense of what could be, especially in terms of what it means for merging the human and the technology. And this comes through in the prevailing aesthetic of the time, which is pretty much very heavily dominated by cyborg aesthetics. So we have a lot of chrome, a lot of shimmery skin, which I'll come back to in a minute. And yeah, just a lot of futuristic aesthetics. So unfortunately, the Beauty 3000 filter will not work on my iPad. So I've recorded a video of it before, but this was definitely the prevailing filter of this early period of development. And I would say it's probably the filter that really kickstarted their popularity. Excuse me for 1 second. Yeah, so Beauty 3000 really marked a change in what we understood filters could be. They went from being cartoonish and silly and often derided by, media critics and men as being, silly and feminine, to something that could be considered a legitimate art form. So this period was really exciting to witness, I think. However, we move from here into 2019 into the open beta of Spark AR. And this period is pretty much wholly defined. I mean, I might be biased because this is primarily where my research interests lie, but it is primarily defined by these incredibly exaggerating surgery filters. So as you can see, they are essentially meant for posing because my teeth look crazy. So they are not intended for, talking, being vocal, engaging in any kind of active use. It's just meant for taking selfies, which is not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself, because the way that women have engaged with selfies and with filters as well has been heavily pathologized over time. It's always seen as like a moral panic. So that there is nothing wrong with taking selfies, obviously, but the fact that this filter literally cannot be used without like making like my teeth and anything that I do that is actively participating in online discourse, life, whatever, it's sort of reminiscent of, or sorry, it underscores the entire issue with these types of filters. They replicate norms of objectification and they limit the way that women are able to express themselves. They don't really offer anything new. And in fact, they offer a significantly worse version of the types of beauty struggles and standards that women were already contending with. One thing that I do find interesting though is that the glossy skin aesthetic that was sort of trademarked in Beauty 3000 carries over into a lot of these filters. So you can see, you know, we've got the extremely thin nose, huge exaggerated lips, the jawline is slimmed as well, and the eyes are pulled back up. So I have naturally downturned eyes. And these filters alter my eyes into something similar to what we could call the fox eye trend. So these two filters also offer an interesting opportunity to look at kind of where the next era of filtering takes us. So in late 2019, so these filters became, the open beta occurred in April. In October, surgery filters were all of a sudden banned out of nowhere. So people were unable to make filters such as this with all of the distortion. So when I was trying to sort of put dates to all of these filters, because again, as part of their massive and very successful black boxing efforts, information as to when and how filters are made and used is completely inaccessible. So I was going back through the feeds of the creators of these filters, and on this one in particular, this particular creator, I noticed that she had remade the filters. So I'll slide it down. And this is, the slider is a newer affordance, but for the purposes of this conversation, the filters were reduced to looking like this instead. So same aesthetic, but no distortion. And the comments on the filters were livid. Basically, people were very upset that the aesthetic was still visible, but the signature, like tiny nose, ginormous lips, and altered eye shape had been removed due to the filter ban, which I think is also a really interesting artifact that kind of lends further credence to the fact that this was never about the aesthetic. A lot of people say like, oh, I love, you know, the cute like cross aesthetic and the freckles and stuff, but as soon as the heavy facial feature distortion has changed, a lot of the regular users were up in arms about it. So these filters were heavily criticized in the media. I also wrote a paper on that if anyone is interested, which I'll bring up on the screen at the end. But these saw a lot of play in the media, and they were banned very swiftly without any warning, which was very upsetting and devastating to the creator economy. People just had their entire filter galleries removed overnight, which I think kind of lends to the issues that we were discussing that were mentioned at the beginning, where it's very difficult to take an empowered approach to using this technology when it can just be removed in this blink of an eye. So that's one challenge of using an externally owned platform for your artistic practice, and also as a researcher, obviously that has greatly affected me as well. So if we move beyond this time period into the surgery filter ban period, this was also during the pandemic. So this began in October of 2019, but this ban carried over until I think August of 2020. And so with that said, people were online a lot more, as everyone knows. So this one in particular, Butterfly Pretty, became to be one of the real defining aesthetics for the lockdown period. It was used by a lot of celebrities, which celebrity use was really crucial to early growth. One of the early growth mechanisms that Meta implemented, which I think was quite good in terms of supporting their filter creators, was that you needed to follow the creator to unlock their filters. So once someone was, once this was pictured on Kylie Jenner, for example, the person who created this saw exponential growth on their account, which I think was quite a good and uncharacteristically supportive mechanism. So yeah, we saw a lot of this one. It's a very simple filter. It has very light distortion, so it makes your lips a little bit bigger. If we can jump it off, it does make my nose a little bit smaller, but these may be revisions at a later date. Either way, it's a very flattering filter, but overall that, really extreme distortion that we saw before has been erased by the surgery filter ban. So in this period as well, because of the lack of distortion, we also saw a bit of a rise in makeup filters. And in my work, I distinguish makeup filters as only applying makeup, not applying any facial feature augmentation. So this one would be termed a beauty filter in my work because of the small augmentations to the face it made, which I mentioned before. However, this one is just my natural face with, what is equivalent to a light blush, some freckles, and skin smoothing applied over the top. So these filters kind of had an opportunity to really shine through during the filter ban period. And perhaps unsurprisingly, once the ban was retracted, they all but disappeared. When I was doing my sampling, I think that I had 3 in my sample because they were just so essentially unpopular after the allowance of feature augmentation back onto the platform. But apart from, the continuation of beauty within this filter ban period, we also had some really novel critiques of the ban itself. So I think this is probably my favorite critique of the phenomenon. So it's obviously, the name says it all, postmodern beauty. It is a perfect critique of these digital beauty standards, and it warps your face in a way that is clearly satirizing the trend, but at the same time, it's close enough to the previous filters that it doesn't actually seem all that absurd. You still got the same teeth problem. My jawline is very chiseled. My eyes are obviously being pulled back by the little AR hands. And I just think this is such an insightful and fun critique of kind of the overwhelming saturation of those types of filters on the platform. And we also get the opportunity to kind of revisit some of the cyborgian aesthetics that we sort of started out with, which I find to be really fascinating. I think this one is, both literally and metaphorically an opportunity to reflect on how we engage with filters, especially in a time when we were forced to turn away from beauty filters and then also turn in on our own self-image. It allows us to sort of critically question the self and bring to the forefront ideas of corporeality and embodiment and disembodiment, and what it means to sort of present an embodied version of the self through filters. And I think that kind of discourse and self-reflection often gets quite lost in the noise that comes from the concerns about beauty and surgery filters. So this was quite an exciting and interesting time in that sense. And beyond these sort of quite reflective and meta commentary filters, we also got a real boon in silly filters. So this is one of the earlier ones by this particular creator, and I just love her work. It is, I think her bio says creator of the world's weirdest AR filters, and I think that she might be correct. So this is one of her earlier ones, and obviously it's marked by a bit of a simpler design, but at the same time, it's incredibly creative. It's really fun to play with. And I want to just sort of jump to one of her later works here as well. I love this. I think it's just so creative. It's so fun. It's giving, you know, like B horror, kind of Lynchian vibes. It's just very creative, the things that she comes up with. You just love to see it. Truly a shining example to what can be done with this medium if you are not sort of restricted by ideals of what you think you should create. So anyway, I'll jump back in. And this is another one of my favorite silly filters. So it offers you the opportunity to jump through a whole bunch of different animal filters. It also allows you to record your voice using a voice modulation effect, which isn't going to work for me right now. But yeah, I just think that this is so fun. Another example of what can be done with the medium if we're not sort of restricted by what we think we should post. However, what we think we should post is a big component of how filter use plays out in the real world. So I feel like it would be remiss of me not to mention that whilst like these filters are incredible, I love them so much, the way that they are used in the real world, especially by children, has been shown to sort of fall along the expected gender lines. So the way that young boys engage with filters has been shown to be in a similar way. It's a form of play. They like to engage with them in a way that makes their friends laugh or themselves laugh. It's entertainment. But young girls as young as 10, I'm citing work by Claire Pescott here from 2020. Young girls show that they know the way that they are meant to interact with filters is through beautification. So even though these filters are available to them, and we would like to think that children are able to engage in, you know, play regardless of gender, unfortunately, the standards that we have sort of created are already becoming internalized at such a young age. And so I also wanted to take a moment to talk about some of the simpler filters and how they can be used to explore identity. So this is probably one of my favorite more simple filters, and the media will go on and on about how, you know, young women are at risk of wanting to get plastic surgery because they've used all of these giant surgery lips. But let me tell you that nothing has ever made me want to change my body more than this filter. I was so convinced for a good while that having 3 eyebrow piercings was like something I needed to do. And I'm just not unconvinced. I kind of love it. But this filter, I think, highlights kind of, again, one of the lost opportunities that gets, again, swallowed up by all of the concerns and sort of noise that occurs around beauty and surgery filters, because making non-permanent body modifications, to me, seems like one of the clearest examples of where AR is kind of like, it fits so naturally into social media expression. It's fun, it's harmless. It's exactly what I think the medium within the sort of confines of social media was designed to do. So it is a shame that it does sort of get swept away with everything else, unfortunately. But yeah, so this is one of my favorite, very simple ones. And then we've also got this filter here by Avatar Perform. I believe their name is Sibel. And I just want to sort of take a moment to pause and talk about the simplistic power of filters such as this. So if you are interested, they have quite a lot of thoughts, posts detailing their motivations behind creating this particular filter. But I think it's just impressive in how simple it is and how communicative it is. And obviously, you know, online spaces have become increasingly divisive. The use of a simple filter like this to designate yourself with they them pronouns, they have other filters that have like she, her, he, him, whatever you identify as, but it's just so subversive and controversial in its simplicity. It somehow has the ability to anger people in sort of the culture wars that we have found ourselves in, where, you know, personal identity has become so divisive. And particularly when we're looking at other platforms like Twitter, where it's become increasingly hostile towards non-gender conforming, basically, you know, straight white male people, where cis is designated as a slur now. So the act of creating this filter and applying it can be considered like quite subversive and an act of, you know, activism, or like yeah, I just think it is very impressive in how simplistic it is and the amount of message that it manages to contain within such a simple filter. So following this filter ban period, which, as I mentioned, it lasted until August of 2020. From that period, obviously we saw, you know, a resurgence of beautifying filters. But what we also saw was the way that elements of beautification have started to leak into, you know, what I would consider to be regular filters or non-beautifying filters. Basically, beautification was found in places where it wasn't before. So, for example, we've got a simple creative filter that doesn't distort the appearance, because why would it? It's you know, like the Mona Lisa face in a frame type situation. But then we get similar-ish filters. So this would be what I would term an aesthetic filter. And we are starting to see very like tame in comparison to some of the previous surgery filters, but a presence of feature augmentation nonetheless. So, you know, my lips are a little bit bigger, my nose looks slimmer, my skin is obviously much smoother, my complexion is brightened. And these have started to proliferate in filters where you wouldn't necessarily expect them. So, for example, this is intended to be reminiscent of a camera, just like, you know, an old school camera. Not necessarily something where I need beautification. And the way that beautification begins to sort of insidiously creep into filters will be sort of quite a common theme moving forward. And it's what we term ambient filtering in academia, which I'll come back to later. But this in particular offers kind of a reasonably stark vision of the contrast. So we have what is, you know, a pastiche filter, as I've termed it, which just edits the image kind of like in a collage-y sort of way, doesn't make any alterations to the facial features, which is great, love it, does what it's supposed to do in a sense. Then we have quite similar aesthetics here. This one sometimes has it. There we go. There's the paper effect. So we've got a similar sort of pastiche collage-y type of effect. However, it is marked by beautification in the same way that this one was. So quite ambient, difficult to detect. I look what I would term micro-optimized. So I look like myself, but a slightly better version, quote unquote, which in itself is quite concerning, because if you begin seeing this micro-optimized version of yourself more often than your regular face, even when you're not specifically seeking out beautification. So if you were just looking for a cool vintage paper effect, but all of a sudden all of the filters include beautification, it can start to, you know, get inside your head, undermine your sense of self, undermine your expectations for how you think you should look. So we move out of this period into kind of the 2021 onwards, which is overall a very stable period for filter development and use. There is not a lot of intervention from Meta. Everything is kind of allowed to just chug along as usual. To revisit some work by Ines Alpha, it's obviously developed significantly in terms of both the aesthetic and the capabilities of the technology. So if we go back to her earlier work, obviously this is still a wonderful effect, but we can see the ways in which it has developed significantly in her practice, and also the capabilities of the technology, which is kind of the defining factor for a lot of the filters moving forward. So both the ambient beauty filtering and the abilities of the technology. So in the hands of a skilled designer, it's almost limitless what can be achieved. And the medium itself is also starting to be taken quite seriously. So Ines designed this filter for the cover of Rolling Stone, which is obviously a huge deal, but it really speaks to the way that AR filters have become a livelihood for these creators, which makes it all the more devastating that the technology is sort of very unceremoniously being removed. Yeah, it speaks to the legitimacy of it as an art form as well. And it's also just a lot of fun to be able to interact with these moving affordances and construct your identity using these, I mean, what Ines terms digital makeup looks. And in terms of looks that are still within a similar realm, the type that I term alt beauty, they have also developed significantly as well. So this type was sort of marked by, if you can remember, the filter that Elon Musk applied to his baby when it was born. So fairly simple, like alternative aesthetics. But, you know, again, in the hands of the right designer with, you know, the vision as well as the capabilities of the technology, we can have something really innovative like this, which is, I think for me personally, when I imagine like futuristic makeup, this is what I imagine. So you will see that, you know, some of the usual beauty effects are there. My eye shape has yet again been changed. And I think my lips are a little bit bigger, but other than that, it's fairly tame, which I appreciate. It gives you the opportunity to really engage in these aesthetics without being weighed down by the expectations of real life beauty standards, which I think really takes us out of the sort of cyborgian fantasy future vision of things. So I briefly want to touch on what I term character filters. So character filters have been a mainstay of the platform for as long as you've been able to make filters, basically. But again, it's something that has developed significantly in the last couple of stable years of filter development along with the technology. And I mean, at this point, you could use them as digital cosplay. So I think that's really interesting. It offers a really broad range of expression. And there are some people out there using them in ways that are really creative and innovative. Obviously, they're not all like, you know, intellectual property characters. People create their own original characters, which I think is an amazing space to be able to sort of express yourself like that. And bring your own characters to life, especially if you are someone that like primarily writes just, you know, fiction. It gives you the ability to sort of transcend into a different medium. And it also allows you to kind of unleash your character onto the world and see what other people do with that. So it becomes quite interactive, which I think is really exciting for creatives in the space. However, as always, we do have to talk about the implications of the way that beautification manifests in character filters. So this is not necessarily an indictment on filters within this type or the people that create them, but kind of more a reflection of how women are drawn and designed in general. So I think the quote from Jessica Rabbit, I'm not bad, I'm just drawn this way, kind of exemplifies the entire situation. What we see in all of these character filters is like, especially ones that are coded as explicitly female, is explicit femininity. Obviously, this is an exaggerated character, but they all fall along similar lines: a smaller jawline, bigger or a different eye shape, a very small nose, and big lips. And this is more just a point of reflection about filters, the way that women are portrayed in the media in general. With characters and character creation, we have the opportunity to draw women or feminine characters literally any way we want. We could do anything, and yet we continue to repeat the same Eurocentric ideals of beauty. You know, it's always youth, slim, small nose, large lips. So this is just more kind of a point on media reflection, I suppose, and a general frustration, I think, about claims that filters can be used for subversive beauty practices, which they absolutely can. But if we can't sort of drag ourselves out of the hole of drawing characters like this that replicate existing beauty norms, to me, I find it a little spurious to argue that people are going to be able to take a beautifying filter and use it in a way that is subversive. So just, yeah, a more broad commentary on, I guess, the way that women are portrayed, very broadly speaking. So I kind of want to take us back to surgery filters, and we'll revisit them in their current state. So again, as I mentioned earlier, the affordance of being able to alter the size of your facial features, this one does your lips, but it can be used across all different sorts depending on how it's designed. That's quite new. So that feature in and of itself, I think, is the most legitimate cause for concern when we're thinking about the ways in which filter use may potentially transcend into real life, like feature augmentation. So for example, the tweakments such as filler and Botox, because having the ability to alter a facial feature on a slider, this is the most autonomous ability that you have with filters, generally speaking. Like with this one, you can tap on and tap through makeup, which is quite standard for a lot of these types of filters. And you can also hold, I'm not sure if it will let me. Well, this one also lets you hold to adjust the amount of freckles and stuff that's on your face. So it offers a very limited amount of customization, but one of the defining factors of beauty filters and filters in general is that they apply homogeneously to all people. So the ability to visualize the way that you are potentially able to go into a clinic on, you know, a high street and get a mil of filler in your lips. Like, you have the opportunity to kind of sit there and play with this potential aesthetic augmentation. And again, you know, there are some proponents who are in favor of beauty and surgery filters who say that it's all fun and games, but I think this is kind of the most realistic point of concern that can arise. So beyond that particular affordance, this particular creator, Sasha Soul Art, she's incredible. Like, she's very talented. She's also prolific. She has made hundreds of filters. However, they all look fairly similar. We are not really breaking any barriers here. So my jawline has been slimmed, my lips have been made larger, my eye shape has again been transformed, and of course my nose is smaller. So the main point of concern, apart from the slider affordance, is the ambient nature of these filters. And what we mean by ambient in academic speak is that it is very natural, quote unquote. So it is difficult to detect. It's a little bit easier to see because it's very early here, so I don't have perfect natural lighting, but with natural lighting, it would be very difficult to see my flaws, scars and things, and blemishes underneath my skin. This is a problem for two reasons. Obviously, it does promote unrealistic standards. People are increasingly becoming uncomfortable with seeing skin texture and things like that. I can speak from personal experience. When I was creating the typology, I applied over 600 filters to myself, and going from looking like this for several hours back to this, it's quite shocking. It's actually I thought going into the project that I had a very stable sense of myself. I was happy with how I looked, but seeing how I could look and living with this face through the screen, which is essentially as good as real life, there is no real delineation between off and online life anymore. It's the same thing. It's very difficult to go back to. You start feeling as though this is your natural or correct face, or at the very least, it's a face that is reasonably within arm's reach. These filters are obviously incredibly exaggerated. It's easier to dismiss them as being harmful, but this perhaps less so. And so in some of my forthcoming research as well, I have been looking at standards of Eurocentricity. One thing that I have found in a lot of these filters is that in almost all surgery filters that I sampled, they changed the eye color, and they almost exclusively did it in a way that lightened the eyes. So this particular creator, to her credit, is one of the only creators I have encountered who actually includes a brown eye option. For the most part, they are overwhelmingly white and green, which is quite concerning. I think it signals sort of an underlying preference towards Eurocentric beauty standards. And these types of filters have also been called out for lightening the skin tone as well, although we can see in some of them they also give you a very unnatural tan. I'm certainly not this color in real life. So to end here, I just sort of wanted to reflect for a moment on what is going to happen with filters after their removal from Instagram. There are over 2 million effects available on Instagram at the moment. Once all of these, so those are created by creators, professional, everyday people. Once these are removed, Instagram's official account will have approximately 140 filters available at last count. So it's bittersweet. It is a funeral. I think I want to say again a huge thank you to the team for inviting me to do this, because in the process of putting together this little sample and reflecting on the works, I have felt so reinvigorated towards filters, because I have spent so much time in the trenches dealing with just beauty filters. It can get kind of depressing, and to widen my lens again and look at the full spectrum of what is available, it's really driven home to me what a creative and exciting body of work that we are about to lose just out of nowhere, essentially. So it's been a very positive experience for me to go through these things. Again, the archiving aspect has been, a very prescient invitation in that sense. A lot of my work is sort of shifting towards how do we archive this ephemeral media. But yeah, it's been a really personally exciting and really reinvigorating for my own personal research journey. So again, thank you so much for having me, and that concludes my conversation on filters. I will also just flick over very quickly to the 2 papers that I've written in case you wanted further information. This one is open access, and this is the one that discusses the filter typology that I've been drawing on. And then I've also got the media critique, which is behind a paywall. So if you would like access, please just message me on ResearchGate and I will send you a copy. But yeah, that's it from me. Thank you again for having me. I really appreciated it.
Thank you so much, Lauren. This has been a fantastic condensed history of face filters, and we're really happy also that this is going to live on in our archive, and it will be also visible. We definitely think it's going to be very valuable, especially after January 14th. And we're very thankful also for your insights from a feminist perspective. I think these topics of you touched upon, would we call it digitized dysmorphia? These phenomena are also very relevant in other platforms. I think I was reading about TikTok now also doing a ban for teens, right? And then maybe it's also like my question for you is how do you deal with, because you dealt more specifically with Instagram, and you can also tell us a little bit like why or what's specific about this platform compared to Snapchat and TikTok, and how do you see maybe these other two platforms in relation to face filters?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the wake of the removal of them. I am sure that you've also seen this, but a lot of the creators that I follow have already started migrating a lot of their works to Snapchat. So I think the key difference between Instagram and Snapchat is obviously the networks that people create. So on Snapchat, it's ephemeral, it's private, it's one-to-one communication a lot of the time, whereas Instagram is essentially a public broadcast. So the way that people present themselves is very different. TikTok is, I think, an interesting case. I think the ban I think it's the UK for people under 16 or 18 in face filters, I think is actually a really good move in governance. I don't really necessarily see it, and it's just beauty filters, I should clarify, so they can still access types for play and stuff like that. I think that is a legitimately good move. I don't necessarily think that you should be seeing how you could potentially alter your face at such a tender time. I remember being that age and literally learning Photoshop so I could make my nose smaller from my MySpace pictures. So to have the ability to just touch that on, I think is quite dangerous. So I welcome that decision. But moving forward, I definitely think we're going to be seeing people reposting from apps like TikTok onto Instagram, which kind of creates like less of, it removes the watermark, so to speak, that occurs up the top that indicates you are using a filter. And given where we're at with generative AI images and things like that, it's just another thing that we're going to have to second guess, which is exhausting. Personally, I'm sick of questioning every image I look at.
Thank you also from my side. I think it's been a really interesting walk through the not only all these kind of filters, but also the relationships with in this case with Meta. And in fact, that brought me to the question of if there's any possibility of having some kind of open source face filters. I know that all these technologies as softwares are tied to each social media platform, but also now that the interoperability between social media platforms, all these activity path protocol that allows different social media platforms to connect between each other. It might be also like an opportunity to develop some kind of open source face filters. I'm not sure if, like, I was just wondering if you have any idea if that's even possible, or if there's any possibility to do something like that.
Yeah, I've seen rumblings of it. Obviously, there's lots of like scrambling and sort of wondering how all of the work can be saved and repurposed. So, like I said, a lot of stuff is being migrated over to TikTok and Snapchat. I think an independent, like, I think we're all just waiting for a new platform that is not owned by these giant technology corporations. And I think like a standalone app or something could be really innovative, but it also does remove the ability for interaction and play, which I think is such a huge part of how people use filters within the app. It's quite a sociable thing. So it's hard to say. It's, yeah, overall, I mean, who knows? Maybe something will be born from the ashes and we'll get an even better platform.
Wonderful. I mean, yeah, thanks a lot. Like, I actually don't like, I have a lot of questions in my head, but I don't know exactly which one. I don't know. Maybe it's also like how do you see your research going forward? Are you planning, like, or what do you see maybe also in the future of these developments?
Yeah, so I think I'm kind of, at first I was obviously scrambling, but I've got a lot of data
Actually,
saved.
that's my first question. How was your reaction in August when this announcement was made by Meta?
When I sent the screenshot of the announcement to my supervisor, she immediately called me because I think she was like worried I was going to hurt myself.
Oh my God.
But no, the initial shock, I lay in bed for a day face down or whatever. And then I was like, all right, time to get on with it. So I've been sort of doing what I can to like forward thinking archiving. So like, oh yeah, that might be a filter I need a photo of in the future. But I've kind of oriented my research around the development. I've actually pivoted to a PhD by publication model because of this change, primarily because I was trying to string such a long period of filter use together that it just made more sense to break it up into smaller publications. So I've covered active filter use, and now I'll kind of focus my research on like the decline and the decay of the platform, I think. So obviously it was extremely difficult news to hear, but there's always research in it, and it lends credence to the work I've already done on kind of like the black boxing of Meta's products, and that you basically cannot use them for anything productive because they may be taken away at any moment.
And we have a question from our audience on the chat. KLB says, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about these lo-fi filters that you showed at one point, the ambient filtering. This seems to be a real moment culturally in terms of visual culture and internet communities. And I wondered, what do you made of this phenomenon?
Which one? Hang on, I might just screen share again so I can.
Well, KLB is talking about the ambient filtering, the lo-fi filters.
Oh, yeah. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I feel like that was, I don't want to say ruined because that's a very simplistic way of looking at it. But yes, I agree with you. It was a real cultural shift, and the way that things changed when beautification came back into the mix. Obviously, I think it kind of, again, I don't want to say like ruined or cheapened, but it diluted the experience. And I think that it took away from what was sort of special about that, because it was kind of exciting to see people get reinvigorated about the original Instagram aesthetic. Like, obviously, Instagram came from the fact that people didn't have good cameras on their phones. And so it's kind of like a bit of a nostalgic meta commentary to have like the most powerful camera in your hand now and intentionally sort of make it look grainy and lo-fi. I think that's a really interesting aesthetic choice.
I was also wondering, in terms of like the preservation of these filters and the archival, like because I'm just wondering which will be like the best way to do that, or how to sort of like, if all these social media platforms end up disappearing and the ability of using these filters is not there anymore, how could we like explain to someone who has never tried something like this? And what should be preserved, in the sense of like, is it enough to just have a video recording of the face filter? Do we need to preserve also the code in which like that the face filter was made with, like all these comments that you mentioned before that people was like adding to this creation? So what's your approach? What should, like, can you like talk a little bit about that too?
Yeah, I think it's a problem that's kind of endemic across all archiving like efforts. We have so much stuff, like what's worthy of archiving, and that's obviously in the eye of the curator. I obviously have a very specific scope to my research, and so that's where my thoughts lie. And I think that's why something like Screenwalks is so important, because you draw in people from all different types of disciplines and they each have their own lens as to what should be archived. So someone who creates filters would have a totally different approach to like everything that I've discussed basically. But yeah, it is the eternal question, you know, Internet Archive is getting attacked. Google doesn't offer its cache feature anymore. Like all of our efforts at archiving are being undermined by kind of like corporatization and also just the sheer volume of digital data that we're putting out. So it is very challenging. I feel like you may also have a better or different approach to it as like artistic curators. What do you sort of look for when you're curating things?
I mean, I guess that we could both reply to this, Marco. But when like creating Screenworks, we, in this case, and particularly in your Screenworks, we do have to admit that when we heard about Spark AI closing, that we thought that that was a great opportunity to go back to face filters. We already had one, and a Screenwork with Zaiba Jabbar, who is a curator. But I guess that her approach was more from the curatorial point of view. So we thought that having like a researcher looking at all those filters that have been created, particularly on that platform, was worth it, also from the point of view of this preservation, in fact. So that was, in this case, like in the case of this scheme, well, that's one of the reasons, and also because, I mean, we like face filters, and we know that they can be problematic, and we know that they have many issues, and they are like tied to those corporations, and they can be harmful for the bodies, and particularly for younger female bodies, or like non-normative bodies. But we also know that they are fun, and we have played with it, and we have like used them. So I guess that it was all of that on the reason to also like get in touch with you and ask you to do this scheme work. I'm not sure if Marco wants to expand on that.
No, I think that, yeah, maybe one thing that is also, as I mentioned in the introduction, representing two photography institutions, and both of us looking at the digital transformations of photography. I think the face filter proved something that is both connected to this lineage of portraiture and self-representation, but it's also something that's completely different, right? Because it has this like power of the network to share a face, or it's not sharing your face, right? Like that's a very different thing. It's sharing something that you apply on someone else's face. So it changes the game completely, while at the same time is rooted in many of these politics of representations that we talked about. So
yeah, absolutely.
There's the specificity about it, and yeah, as John said, like we had like Zaiba more from an art discourse, and yeah, there's this perspective from the creation, but also like this impact that it has on the medium and on the social side of the people who actually consume it, makes it a very, very, yeah, intriguing and specific also underlooked, I would say, medium.
Yeah, I think anything that is dominated, or at least is seemingly dominated by women and women users, is often dismissed or pathologized, which is, I mean, it happened to selfies, it happened to influencers as well. Like, they've only been taken serious as like an
The
economic
narcissistic narrative, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you get like these marketing, like dark triad terms attributed to them, which I find to just be very silly, to be honest. But yeah, so I mean, yeah, I completely agree with everything you've said. And I also think going into this at the beginning, I was kind of conscious that platforms come and go. So I went into it, I mean, kind of naively. I was like, oh, yeah, you know, Vine shut down and MySpace doesn't exist anymore, but it will never happen to me. But it did. So I did go in like with archiving in the back of my mind, but I was not necessarily expecting it to come around.
Maybe, yeah, that's just one final question we could, ask is if, because, yeah, as you said, like it was done very unceremoniously, as you said, or something like that, right? Like, but it was not really explained, this decision, right? And yeah, I was also quite shocked because it's a feature that basically was kind of stolen. So there was a lot of effort in actually taking this, and now it's just gone. And yeah, I just felt like, what's happening? What are the reasoning behind, these decisions?
Yeah, so I think it's twofold. As always, Meta has not explained why they're doing it, but my sort of big picture view of the situation is that everyone is pumping money into AI at this point, and it has to come from somewhere. The metaverse is a universally panned concept, so I think the money is kind of coming directly out of AR and VR to fund the AI efforts. But it also, I think, signals future plans for Meta, because they're not getting rid of it completely. They're just pulling it in-house. So, I mean, the filters that Instagram has created, some of them are cool, but for the most part, they're quite uninspired, especially compared to the breadth of the literally millions of filters that people have created. So I think it is probably in preparation for a future technology. They've got true AR glasses on the horizon, but they are apparently way too expensive to be a consumer product. But I don't think that that will always be true. So I think it's in preparation for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, if that ends up happening, we will call you again to go into that technology and to explain us a little bit about whatever new that Meta has created with AR. Yeah, I think it's a great moment maybe to wrap up. Thank you so much for like your generosity, for all the research that you've done and that you have shared with us. It's been a really interesting screen walk.
Yeah,
and
thank you from my side, and thanks to everybody who joined on Zoom and on Twitch. This is our last screen walk of the year, so we're gonna be back in February, early February. I don't remember exactly the date, but yeah, don't worry. We'll be back after the winter break on this side of the hemisphere and the summer break for you, Lauren. Thank you again so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.